I'm Mouris. I work at the National Physical Laboratory in the UK. I worked there since 1968, and before that I worked at GEC, General Electric Company, for about 8 years. At MPL I'm involved in mathematical modelling, numerical analysis, mathematical software, and particularly measurement uncertainty evaluation. As I'm a mathematician, I'm not trained in statistics, but I've picked up an awful lot of statistics along the way. In terms of measurement uncertainty evaluation, I was talking this morning about the GUM, the Guide to the Expression of Uncertainty in Measurement. It's a document which has been around for some 21 years now. I think the original date of publication was October 1993, so it's about 20 and a quarter years old. In fact, we celebrated the 20th anniversary with a special meeting at MPL last November. We had about 80 participants, and it was a very successful meeting, and I'm one of the editors of a publication of a special issue of a journal where we have present the proceedings of that meeting. On the GUM itself, as I said, the GUM has been around quite a long time. It served us well, but it has some deficiencies. It served us well in the sense it's the first document that really brought together the concepts of random error or random effects and systematic error or systematic effects. And as I said, it was the first document to do that, and it brought them together in a somewhat convincing way. And it's essentially the Bible on measurement uncertainty. It's adopted throughout the world. It's been adopted by some countries as a norm or standard, but it doesn't attain that authority in all countries, of course. In terms of the GUM itself, it can be considered to be composed of a number of components. One of the most important components in my mind is the concept of a measurement model. A measurement model is a mathematical description of the relationship between the quantities that we know about and the quantities that we want to know about. Y equals a function of x, where x represents the quantities about which we know something, and y represents the quantities about which we want to know something. And if we apply the GUM, we need to have knowledge of the quantities involved. The GUM is partly knowledge-based, but it's not completely knowledge-based. When we come to entertain quantities that are systematic, we use knowledge of those quantities to assign a probability distribution to them. For instance, if we know a lower bound and an upper bound of a quantity, we assign a rectangular distribution to that quantity between those two bounds. And if we have other knowledge of those quantities, we assign the appropriate probability distributions. That's called a type B evaluation of uncertainty. On the other hand, if we have statistical knowledge of a quantity, in the terms of repeated indication values, for instance, we treat them a different way according to the current GUM. And we evaluate the standard deviation in the usual way from those repeated indications. The revision of the GUM is what I'm concerned mostly about at MPL these days. In the revision of the GUM, we want to carry on the tradition of the type B evaluation of uncertainties, knowledge-based evaluation of the distribution. For type A evaluations, we want to go the same way. We want to make the assignment of probability distribution to a quantity that's decided by a number of repeat indications and assign a probability distribution to that. That's not what is in the current GUM, but we're putting it in the new GUM. That's what it's all about. And it will simplify the treatment. No need to use degrees of freedom, effective degrees of freedom anymore. We're doing away with that. No need to employ the Welch-Satterthwaite formula. We're doing away with that. And so the new GUM will be somewhat simpler than the old GUM. Moreover, we want the new GUM to be more reliable than the old gum. We want the new gum to accord with the provisions of ISO 17025 in providing some assurance to the user of the gum that he can make some statement on the quality, the reliability of the results produced. And so we're going a long way towards giving that solution. In giving that solution, we've prepared a number of supporting documents to the gum. Gum Supplement 1 is concerned with a single measurand, a single output quantity, and we take our knowledge of the input quantities as probability distributions. We propagate those probability distributions through the model to obtain the probability distribution for the measurand, from which we can compute what we want to compute, the best estimate and the standard uncertainty of the measurand. Supplement 2 to the gum is concerned with the extension of Supplement 1 to a greater number of output quantities. I think that's enough. Giving some background, I'm prepared to answer some questions. I return your question. You said, do we take the instrument into account? What do you mean by that?
The error of when we measure, there is a measurement error.
Measurement is influenced by measurement instrument.
By the instrument. When we measure, there's the
measuring device.
Yes.
Measuring device. So
well, we try to model the device. The model of the device is part of our measurement model. The measurement model is basically a physical, chemical or biological model in the first instance. But to that we have to append correction factors, for instance, which takes account of instrumental departures from perfection. We have to impart knowledge of these correction factors. We might have a correction factor representing the resolution of the instrument, for instance, and we have to create a bound on the possible values of this factor. And every instrument we can consider the possible contributions to its error. And so if you look at the gum, it contains an interesting observation. You have to model the situation to the extent required, or words to that effect. If you're unable to model it, you have to develop a more sophisticated model which takes into account those considerations. And so the gum really is somewhat circular in that respect. It doesn't give a definite answer, because I think there is no definite answer. We need to model to the extent required. When I say model, it's not necessarily a mathematical model. These days, some models are so complicated, we have to have a computational model. We have to have a process where we go from values of the input quantities to values of the output quantities. As long as we can do that, we could do that repeatedly, we got a model in place.
In some industries or fields, the gum will be widely accepted and used, and in others, I think it's completely ignored. Now, why do you think that is, and how can you reach those whole areas, I'm talking about whole industries or areas of science, where they're just not looking at things this way at all?
That's a good question. You're absolutely right, of course. I didn't mention it this morning, but someone else mentioned it in another context, that the gum is really gives a bottom-up treatment, because you have to have quite intimate knowledge of what's going on in your measurement. We have to identify all the quantities involved in the measurement, like all the errors of the instrument, for instance, as opposed to the physical effects. You have to model everything. But on the other hand, some chemical treatments, for instance, I'm not saying it's impossible to do such modelling. It's very difficult to do such modelling. And so in chemistry and perhaps in biology too, the model is often top-down, in which you can't easily identify the individual contributions and the individual sources of uncertainty, in other words. And top-down modelling is used quite extensively in chemistry. You've all seen the fishbone diagrams in some chemical texts and some chemical guides. The Eurochem guide, for instance, is a very good guide, and it has some bottom-up modelling, quite a lot of bottom-up modelling, but it gives some treatment on the top-down process as well. And I think in some industries, coming back to your question, it's going to be very difficult to develop a GUM bottom-up model. It's going to be very difficult. We're talking to Rolls-Royce in the UK. They are asking for a collaboration on measurement modelling and taking account of the data. Because you might not know this, but every aircraft in practice which has Rolls-Royce engines on board, the signals, the sensors on the aircraft are continuously monitored by Rolls-Royce. They receive a signal from all the temperature, pressure sensors, etc., on the plane, and they all go to Rolls-Royce. And so there's a fleet of engineers, computer scientists, etc., at Rolls-Royce who monitor those signals, and the process is semi-automated, but they're looking for any signs of the signal going off beam, going awry in some sense. And that sort of situation is going to be very difficult to monitor. We have to identify if the pressure is drifting too far, for instance, or can it be accounted for by uncertainty? So it's the balance between uncertainty and natural variability, which a number of the talks today have been concerned with, of course. And so it will happen, I hope, but it might not happen for a long, long time.
Your last answer ties into a theme that's I've run into not infrequently in conferences recently, and that's uncertainty quantification.
Right.
In particular, I guess the mention of Rolls-Royce and the aircraft engines brought this up because one of the main players in this has been Pratt & Whitney, who's been very active at working on uncertainty quantification. I'm curious if how familiar you are with that work, and in particular how it matches this philosophically what you're trying to do with the GUM, and both philosophically and in terms of methods.
Uncertainty quantification seems to me, with my little knowledge of the subject, a much broader entity than measurement uncertainty. And measurement uncertainty addresses part of the scenery here. Uncertainty quantification takes other factors into account. I think we mentioned this morning knowledge elicitation, and it considers such subjects. It considers model uncertainty, for instance. I well remember a colleague from NIST, our counterpart in the United States, who was concerned with what was it called, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And he at NIST and other two organizations were requested by the US government to prepare their best estimates of the rate of oil flowing from the spill. And they prepared their uncertainty budgets, they prepared their best estimates. And my understanding is what the US government did with those, they looked at the three estimates, two which were quite close, the others quite a long way away, and that they wanted to come up with an estimate of the oil rate. And they performed some sort of model averaging to achieve that result. model averaging is part of uncertainty quantification, an important part of it, I think. I'm doing work at the moment on metrological traceability in the medical area. And in this area, there's no right answer, there's no right model. How do you model a cancer patient? And we have a plethora of models in this situation. We're looking at model averaging. Who's to say that that model of the human physiology is better than that model? And so we're trying to consider a class of models and doing model averaging procedures to come up with an answer to the problem.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.